more than 210,000 American auto jobs hanging in the balance, nearly $40,800 added to the average price of a new vehicle in the United States, and an industry that represents almost 5% of the entire American economy now facing one of the most dangerous supply chain disruptions in modern manufacturing history. These are not projections being floated by critics or political opponents. These are early warning signals, real, documented, and already measurable, emerging as the escalating trade war between the United States and Canada begins to fracture the deeply integrated North American auto system that took more than half a century to build. This is Edward with Global Entry News, and today I want to give you the full picture, because what is happening right now goes far deeper than tariff numbers and trade policy debates. This is a story about the future of American manufacturing, American jobs, and whether the decisions being made in Washington today are protecting the country's industrial strength or quietly dismantling it. Let me start with what happened in Ontario, because it set the tone for everything that followed. Prime Minister Mark Carney stood inside a major automotive manufacturing facility and delivered a warning that was anything but routine. He made it clear that Canada no longer believes the old trade relationship with the United States can be treated as stable or predictable. His government, he announced, was launching a new auto strategy backed by billions in incentives and industrial investment, while simultaneously preparing the Canadian economy for a future in which American tariffs could arrive at any moment without warning. The signal was unmistakable. Canada was done waiting for Washington to figure out its direction. Canada was moving forward on its own. And here is where things get genuinely surprising, and why at Global Entry News we felt this story demanded a full breakdown. The tariffs that were designed in Washington to protect American industry may, in fact, be doing the opposite. They may be accelerating the rise of Canada as the next great manufacturing powerhouse on this continent. The evidence behind that claim is more dramatic than most people have had the chance to examine closely. And by the time we get to the end of this, I think you will understand why some of the most serious economists in North America are treating this not as a political talking point, but as a structural economic warning. To understand where things stand today, you need to understand how we got here. What began as a political calculation in Washington has now spiraled into an industrial crisis of genuinely unprecedented proportions. By late 2025, the cumulative effect of tariffs imposed on everything from steel to electric vehicles had added an average of $6,400 to the price of a new vehicle in the United States. For electric vehicles specifically, that number was even more severe. Some models saw price increases of more than $9,000. These aren't abstract statistics. They represent the direct, tangible consequence of a tariff strategy that is now reverberating through every single segment of the American auto industry. But the price impact, as significant as it is, tells only part of the story. The deeper damage is structural. The North American auto supply chain is one of the most complex and tightly integrated manufacturing systems in the world. A vehicle being built in Michigan or Ohio or Indiana typically crosses the Canada-US border 5 or 6 times during its production process, parts moving back and forth as different stages of manufacturing are completed on both sides of the border. Every one of those crossings now carries additional tariff costs. Even seemingly modest tariffs on steel and aluminum are compounding at each stage, driving up the cost of components that manufacturers can no longer produce domestically at competitive rates. The result is a massive, ongoing disruption to the cross-border supply chains that have powered the industry for decades. Here at Global Entry News, we want to give you the numbers that analysts are now making public, because the scale is staggering. One study by a prominent manufacturing research group projected that if current tariff trends continue, the U.S. auto sector could lose as much as 18% of its total production capacity by the year 2030. Think about what that means in concrete terms. Nearly 4 million fewer vehicles rolling off American assembly lines each year. And alongside that production loss, the potential elimination of 210,000 high-skilled manufacturing jobs. That is more than 10% of the sector's entire workforce gone, not because of a recession or a global financial crisis, but because of a trade policy decision made in Washington. The investment picture is equally alarming. By the end of 2026, analysts are projecting that $320 billion in lost automotive capital investment could drain out of the United States as manufacturers, already squeezed by rising tariff costs and weakening consumer demand, look elsewhere for more stable and predictable environments in which to make long-term bets. One major automaker, declining to be identified publicly, stated that it was already in active discussions about shifting substantial portions of its North American production to Canada, where the risk of sudden tariff escalation is dramatically lower. And that brings us to Canada, because while the American auto sector is absorbing these blows, the picture north of the border looks entirely different. Thanks to Carney's industrial strategy, Canada has been positioning itself as the safe harbor for automotive investment in North America. By 2026, foreign direct investment into Canada's auto and battery sectors had surged to a staggering $95 billion Canadian dollars, almost doubling the total automotive investment Canada had seen across the entire previous 2 decades combined. New gigafactories are being built across Ontario. Projections show more than 70,000 new jobs being created in the coming years, many of them high-paying, highly skilled positions that under different circumstances would have been going to workers in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. I want to be direct with you about what this means, because at Global Entry News, we believe you deserve analysis that goes beyond the headlines. Canada, by simply avoiding the self-inflicted wounds of escalating tariffs, is emerging as a magnet for global capital in the automotive sector. Its steady hand on trade policy, combined with generous clean technology incentives and a stable regulatory environment, is starting to pull critical industries away from the American heartland. And according to analysts, if the current tariff trajectory holds, Canada could capture up to 40% of all new automotive manufacturing investments in North America within the next 5 years. That would be an extraordinary shift. Historically, the United States has been the undisputed leader in North American automotive production. The idea that Canada could be capturing nearly half of all new investment in the sector would have seemed impossible a decade ago. Now let's talk about the human cost, because policy numbers only mean so much until you connect them to real people. The most immediate victims of this trade war are American consumers, who are now facing the most significant vehicle price increases in decades. By 2026, the average price of a new vehicle in the United States had surpassed $53,000, the highest in the nation's history. Electric vehicles, which had been actively marketed as a more affordable alternative to gas-powered cars, have seen their prices surge dramatically, with some entry-level models jumping from around $35,000 to nearly $48,000. For many middle-class American families, these price levels put a new vehicle essentially out of reach. But it is not just about sticker price. Consumers are now facing longer wait times. Some dealers are reporting inventory buildups of more than 20% since tariffs were escalated, as vehicles sit on lots that consumers can't or won't purchase at current prices. What was once a relatively predictable market now feels unstable and unpredictable. Families are holding on to older vehicles longer, which is driving up maintenance costs and creating a secondary wave of financial strain for households that can least afford it. For American workers, the impact is even more direct. By the first quarter of 2026, more than 38,000 automotive workers had been furloughed or laid off due to tariff-related disruptions. That number, already painful, is projected to climb dramatically if escalation continues. And the communities feeling this most acutely are places that were already depending on the auto sector as their primary economic anchor: Michigan, Ohio, Indiana. States where auto manufacturing isn't just an industry, it is the backbone of local economies, the source of stable employment for generations of workers who built careers without needing a college degree. Here at Global Entry News, we hear a lot of policy debate about protecting American workers. But what is often missing from that debate is an honest accounting of who is actually bearing the cost right now. These are the workers. These are the families. These are the communities where plants are going quiet, where suppliers are delaying investments, where the financial math of running a manufacturing operation no longer adds up because the cost of every input has been inflated by tariff after tariff, compounding across every stage of production. A recent study found that 42% of automotive suppliers in Ontario's manufacturing corridor had already delayed capital investment due to uncertainty about future tariff hikes. And when suppliers delay investment, the disruption doesn't stay contained. It spreads across steel, electronics, plastics, chemicals, and every other sector that feeds into the auto supply chain. Some U.S. plants are already reporting production capacity reductions of up to 30% from the combined pressure of rising input costs and a shrinking consumer base. This isn't a temporary blip. It is beginning to reshape the fundamental business model of automotive manufacturing in America. Detroit, once the proud center of American automobile production and the symbol of this country's industrial identity, is already seeing widespread uncertainty ripple through its local economy. As manufacturers scale back, ancillary businesses, parts suppliers, logistics companies, local restaurants, service providers are all feeling the pressure. Tax revenues for local governments are falling. The cascading effect on public services, schools, healthcare infrastructure, roads, is becoming harder to ignore. In many ways, the United States is facing a situation that economists describe as a perfect storm. A policy intervention that was designed to protect domestic industry is now threatening to unravel the very sectors it was meant to safeguard. The tariffs are raising costs for American manufacturers, pushing investment decisions toward Canada, accelerating job losses in the very communities they were supposed to help, and leaving American consumers holding the bill in the form of the highest vehicle prices in history. At the same time, Canada is executing a strategy that is, frankly, a masterclass in using a rival's mistake to your own advantage. Carney's approach is not just defensive, it is aggressively offensive. Canada is not simply waiting for investment to arrive, it is actively structuring its policy environment to make itself the most attractive destination for automotive and battery manufacturing in North America. Tax credits for clean technology, subsidies for critical mineral processing, favorable energy policies, renewable infrastructure that makes the cost of running a manufacturing facility significantly lower than in many American states. The numbers on Canada's critical mineral position alone are worth pausing on, because this is a dimension of the story that rarely gets covered in depth. By 2027, projections suggest that Canada could be supplying up to 18% of the world's demand for battery-grade nickel and nearly 12% of the world's lithium processing capacity. These are not minor footnotes. These are strategic advantages in the global race for electric vehicle dominance. The countries that control critical mineral supply chains will have enormous leverage over the future of clean transportation, and Canada is making calculated, funded moves to position itself at the center of that supply chain. South Korean battery manufacturers, who had been planning massive gigafactories inside the United States, have begun negotiating with Canadian authorities about establishing operations in Ontario instead. Global automakers are quietly redirecting North American production decisions northward. The financial world is taking notice. International investors who once viewed the United States as the default stable environment for large capital commitments are now running a different risk calculation, one that factors in political unpredictability, tariff volatility, and the possibility that any long-term manufacturing investment in the U.S. could be disrupted by the next policy swing. This is the part that Washington is not yet openly discussing, and at Global Entry News we think it deserves to be said plainly. The United States may have significantly underestimated how much its tariff strategy would erode the perception of America as a reliable economic partner. For companies making billion-dollar decisions about where to build factories and establish supply chains, reliability and predictability are not just preferences, they are non-negotiable requirements. And right now, Canada is offering those things far more convincingly than the United States is. The contrast could not be sharper. While the US has moved toward trade isolationism, Canada has doubled down on openness, strategic investment, and long-term industrial planning. The result is an investment climate that global manufacturers are increasingly choosing over the American alternative. By the end of 2026, if current trends hold, Canada could have secured 40% of all new automotive manufacturing investment in North America. The United States, which has spent decades as the undisputed continental leader in automotive production, could find itself in a genuinely unfamiliar position, scrambling to maintain relevance in an industry it once dominated completely. The question that policymakers in Washington need to be asking, and that every American voter and worker deserves to have answered, is whether the current strategy is actually delivering what it promised. Were these tariffs going to bring jobs back to the American heartland? Were they going to make U.S. manufacturing stronger and more competitive? Were they going to give American workers more security and better wages? Because the early evidence points in the opposite direction on every one of those measures. Job losses are rising, investment is moving north, vehicle prices are at historic highs, and communities that were promised a manufacturing revival are instead watching plants slow down or shut. Canada's rise is not accidental. It is the direct result of a conscious, well-funded, strategically executed industrial policy, one that identified the uncertainty being created by U.S. trade decisions and moved quickly to offer global investors exactly the opposite: stability, predictability, clean energy infrastructure, critical mineral access, tax incentives calibrated for the industries of tomorrow. Carney has been clear about the vision, and the capital flows suggest the world's investors believe him. For the United States, the cost of this shift, if it continues, will be measured not just in lost jobs or lost vehicle production, but in lost industrial identity. The American auto sector is not just an economic engine, it is a cultural symbol, a generational source of pride and livelihood for millions of families across the Midwest and beyond. The idea that it could be weakened, not by foreign competition arriving from overseas, but by the cumulative effect of policy decisions made in Washington, is a possibility that deserves far more serious public attention than it is currently receiving. The reality is this: countries that provide the best investment environment, not the harshest tariffs, will become the leaders of tomorrow's industries. And if Washington does not find a way to course correct soon and credibly, Canada's quiet industrial revolution may not just be a challenge for the United States to manage. It may mark the beginning of a permanent redistribution of North American manufacturing power, one that reshapes the economic geography of this continent for decades to come. This is Edward with Global Entry News. If this breakdown helped you understand what is really at stake in the US-Canada trade war, share it with someone who needs to see the full picture. Subscribe so you don't miss our next analysis, because this story is moving fast, and the decisions being made right now will determine where North American manufacturing stands for the next generation.